So are we live? It doesn't say. Oh yes, the webinar is now live. Welcome everybody. Welcome to a large audience and to what is going to be a really fascinating talk, which will bring the history of our area to life. I am Doro Marden. I'm a trustee of Primrose Hill Community Association and a member of the events team. So I'm doing the housekeeping and introductions. This is our 12th event online since September. Everything from fermentation to loneliness. We do record them, so if you want to look at our YouTube channel for past talks, please do. And please do put in the chat how you heard about this event, because it's really useful to know, for us to know how you heard about it. And in the chat and on our website is a link for donations. The events are free, but Primrose Hill Community Association, like many small charities, has suffered a severe drop in income during COVID. So if you can donate, that would be very welcome. We agreed that we would say £5, but less is absolutely fine. And of course, more is absolutely fine as well. So the format for the evening, we're very sorry not to have our local councillor, Pat Callaghan, who was on all the publicity. Unfortunately, the local Labour group decided to have their AGM this evening, so obviously she couldn't miss it. Pat has been a great supporter of Stephenson's walk and helped to get funding for the scoping exercise. But we're delighted to have Nadina here instead, Nadina Roisman. Nadina works for LabTech, who own Camden Markets, and since 2012 she's been involved in looking after the historic buildings on the estate. She's a specialist conservation and heritage architect, and with the support and advice from Peter and the Camden Railway Heritage Trust and the Camden planning team, she worked on the listed buildings in the Stables Market and managed to get them removed from the Heritage at Risk Register in 2018, which is quite an achievement. Before making London her home, she worked at the Smithsonian Institute in the US and for UNESCO in Latin America. She will tell us about her involvement with Peter and the Stephenson Walk. And then Peter will do a presentation for around 40 minutes, and then we shall have questions. Please put questions in the Q&A box, and we will deal with as many of them as we can. So Nadina, over to you.
Thank you, Doro. Hello, everybody. I just wanted to tell you a bit about the inception of the project and about Peter, actually. I have had the privilege of getting Peter's advice since the very beginning of my work in Camden. Many of you are familiar with Peter's work and his tireless efforts to bring our railway heritage and our community together. What I find most remarkable is that where other people only see unrelenting development and gentrification, Peter sees opportunities. In the redevelopment of Camden Yard, he saw once in a lifetime opportunity to create new routes through the area that serve the wider community. In his own words, and I'm going to read this, is such routes can introduce the public to the area's history and foster a civic pride that will help offset the sense of loss that urban intensification can engender. Stephenson Walk is inspired in the daily route that this great engineer took over a decade in the 1830s while building the railway from Camden town to Birmingham. It will be a pedestrian and a cycle way between the Regent's Canal towpath adjacent to the 1837 abutment of the Robert Stephenson's Railway Bridge, running past Stephenson's Winding Waltz and following the curve of his mainline railway towards his Primrose Hill tunnel and its portals. By sheer force of persistence, Peter managed to prompt Network Rail to spend £1 million on clearing the sediment accumulated in the Winding Waltz, which are key to this initiative, but there's still a long way to go. And that is the reason why we are here, to learn about Stephenson Walk and work together to make it happen. Before going back to Doro and Peter to start the interesting part of the talk, I would like to mention the support of the London Borough of Camden and that of Councillor Pat Callaghan, who has actively championed the project since the very beginning, but couldn't join us today. Their work has brought us to this point where we finally see this heritage trail materializing. So back to you, Dora.
Thank you. So now it's a pleasure to introduce Peter, who's an old friend and neighbour, and I think practically the first person I ever met when we moved to Primrose Hill originally, 30 or more years ago. He's a civil engineer and an economist who worked in water resources development all over the world and culminated in a scheme to fill up the Dead Sea from the Red Sea. The Camden Railway Heritage Trust, which he founded in 2007, works to open up our remarkable industrial and transport heritage. He leads walks, which I highly recommend, really fascinating, gives talks, which he's doing today, and he also writes about it. I highly recommend his book about King's Cross, available in all good bookshops around the area. So Peter, over to you. We look forward to hearing about Stephenson Walk.
Thank you very much, Dora. Thank you. And thanks to Primrose Hill Community Association for allowing me to present Stephenson Walk, the first kind of public airing that it has had. And thank you very much, Nadina, for your generous words. I certainly have done very little to merit them, and but I'm still living in hope. Now, let's see whether we can share screen and open up the slide presentation. Bear with me. So here we are. So we're going to have a look at where we are now. This explains where Stephenson's Walk is at the moment. It was tendered just over a year ago. We awarded a feasibility study in May 2020. The study's funded mainly through the Community Infrastructure Levy. The study should have already started, but there have been all kinds of delays, not least because of the pandemic and site access. But we do expect to start any moment now. And I do need to insist that all of the ideas that I'm presenting here are at the conceptual stage. The feasibility study itself has not started. So these are just conceptual ideas, which led to the tender documents that were then bid against to carry out the study. So how did we get here? It all started with Morrison's application for a redevelopment of the supermarket site, which is a major part of what was Camden Goods Yard. In response to that, Camden produced a planning framework. But this planning framework had no east-west links such as Stephenson's Walk. Despite quite a formidable group of interested parties getting together and trying to push for something like that and influence the shape of the planning framework. And from our point of view as the Trust, the access to Stephenson's stationary winding vaults is fairly critical if they're going to be repurposed in future. So Morrison's application was approved in November 2017. And one thing we did get out of that was a safeguarded site for a future visitor center for the winding vaults, an area of 20 meters by 10 meters on a street which the developers have called Winding Waltz Way. We then felt that we needed to try once more to see whether we could get Stephenson's Walk incorporated into these plans, and prepared this concept design with some help from one housing group and from the Labs group. This led to discussions with Camden in January 2020 with their head of regeneration. And interestingly, Stephenson Walk was treated more or less as a self-evident community asset. However, we now face the task of weaving Stephenson Walk into an approved Morrison's development plan, which clearly means that the options are inevitably more limited than they would have been if we had it from the start. So a question is raised, should Camden not be more proactive in place shaping rather than cobbling together planning frameworks in response to development proposals? This is the Chalk Farm Railway lands, which I have said are all in play. So all of these separate areas are in some way or another being developed or redeveloped. You can see that it's a sort of fan shape. The sides of the fan are the railway in the sort of the southwest, Chalk Farm Road on the opposite side, and at the end of the fan, Regent's Canal. The apex of the fan is Primrose Hill Station, the former station. And we can see two Morrison sites here, which are Morrison St. George developments. We can see Gilby's Yard and Juniper Crescent, two areas of social housing owned by one housing group. We've got Camden Lock and Stables Market, which are both the Labs group's properties. We have the Roundhouse, and we have what I call the throat, la gorge, which is the French for that part of a lady's fan. Now, we have, as well as these sort of other strong boundaries, we also have a rather powerful group of stakeholders, which include London Borough of Camden London Borough of Camden, Network Rail, and the Canal and River Trust. So this is a general plan of the walk. The walk itself is shown in green. Links to other routes are shown in orange. So Morrison's is the building, the very large white building with, we can see its footprint there, and is about to be demolished. So we're going to start the walk here at, I hope you can see my cursor. We're going to start the walk at Southampton Bridge, or just under it on the towpath. We're going to ascend up to Oval Road, and we're going to continue along Gilby's Yard, down some horse stairs, through a couple of tunnels to the towpath. We're then going to re-enter the walk via the towpath and go return up via the horse stairs, continue along the railway line up to the bridge here at Regent's Park Road. The first part of the walk is about 150 meters. The second part of the walk about 550 meters. So this is where we start. We're looking down through the LMS portal, London, Midland and Scottish Railway portal, down onto the towpath. And from the towpath up to the portal, we would be looking at creating some sort of stairs or ramp. Now, the stairs or ramp are going to complement the narrow staircase that's on the other side of Oval Road. You may be familiar with this. It's opposite the Pirate Castle, but it's one which you may agree doesn't feel very user-friendly, especially to those with prams and small children. The LMS portal itself is now an archaeological curiosity. In the past, it led to a wooden staircase, we can see this in the photo, up to the first floor of the railway offices, where railway staff and handling agents performed clerical work for Camden Goods Station, which was probably the busiest goods yard in London in the 1930s when this photo was taken. So we're going to cross Oval Road and walk along Gilbey's Yard to the horse stairs, which are at the end. After Camden Goods Yard was sold for development, outline planning permission was given in 1993 for social housing, a food store, which is now Morrison's, and a petrol filling station, which has now been demolished. This social housing in Gilbey's Yard was developed by Community Housing Group, now One Housing. One condition attached was that the walkway shown was to be open to the public, leading at the far end down to the towpath. I don't believe this right of way has ever been rescinded, despite One Housing proclaiming on their notices that the land is private. So we're going to treat the route as if it was open to the towpath as originally intended. Here we've gone through the wooden gates and we're descending the horse stairs to the towpath level. Now, British Rail was to extend the route to the towpath via these horse stairs and 2 short stretches of tunnel. A very simple job, but this was never done, perhaps because privatization intervened the very next year in 1994. So we're going to descend these 3-meter wide stairs. There are 36 shallow stairs with 10-centimeter risers, which lead down to the Western Horse Tunnel. As we're going to pick our way through what in the past were discarded syringes on the steps of the horse stairs into the 3-meter wide horse tunnel here. The overall layouts will be shown on a later slide and become clearer. But from that Western Horse Tunnel, we exit into the coal supply tunnel, which used to supply the Winding Waltz with coal. So this section of coal supply tunnel, you can see, leads to the towpath. And we've now emerged onto the towpath via this gate, which is a rickety gate you may well have passed in your walks along the canal. Here you can see that we are standing on the towpath. The rickety gate there is open, but we're going to resume our walks through a rather grander structure than the grander entrance than that rickety gate. We're we're going to create an opening in the towpath retaining wall. At least we're going to hope that we can do this. Its feasibility has yet, of course, to be proven as part of this study. But we're going to assume that it is feasible in order to describe the next leg of our walk. The study will also have to consider for what hours the concourse entrance here can be kept open. In the future, when we have perhaps repurposed the Winding Waltz, there may well be a water bus stop here. So we've now gone through the back through the rickety gate, as it were, and we have to imagine this to be a wider concourse. To create that, we would have to excavate ground on the left side here and build a retaining wall to support the railway lines. We would also expand it on the other side as far as the horse tunnel, which we saw previously. So what we'll do is create a triangular area, some 12 meters in length by 10 meters in base width along the towpath, which would provide an assembly area and possibly a gallery exhibition space. We would try and sort of remember the line of coal tunnel that we will have demolished. Some of it may well be capable of being kept. We could also show its line by paving or light rails in the paving, and any works that were done here would have to be preceded by a full archaeological investigation. This is the next section of coal tunnel, which is not part of the feasibility study. But you can see that beyond that wall that we saw in the previous slide is this next section of coal tunnel. And at the end there is a gate, and that gate leads down into the coal stores of the Winding Waltz. There is a gallery which runs left to right, extending basically leftwards from that gate at a higher level in the Winding Waltz. We'll see that again on a later slide, but this tunnel could be used in future as part of an escape route from the Winding Waltz. Yeah. I said that we would look at a clearer sort of plan of all of these underground features. You can see where we came down the horse stairs. Here we came down the horse stairs. We went along the Western Horse Tunnel. We entered through this narrow entrance here, and we exited the coal supply tunnel onto the towpath. And we've now gone back in, and we're going to be coming out the same way. And I said that the coal tunnel continues to the Winding Waltz here. This is these are the coal stores. That was the gate that you saw. And here is the gallery, which runs kind of east-west. Now, the concourse area is shown in dark here. I think I said it was about 12 meters by 10 meters at the base. There are these red beams and posts are there to support a structure above the concourse, which is shown in lighter shading, which we've called St. David's Halt. It's a potential cafe restaurant. The roof of the concourse would be glazed to provide natural light down into the concourse. And the reason that it's been called St. David's Halt is after the founder of the Pirate Club, Viscount St. David's. And it's the Pirate Club that will animate the view from the cafe as you sit there and enjoy a coffee outside. Now, we're going to, as I say, we're going to exit the concourse, and we're going to come into the Western Horse Tunnel again and up the stairs. And here we can see the route that we're taking. It's probably the one shown in green. I've tried to show a cycle lane in blue and a pedestrian walk in green. And the outline of St. David's Halt is shown there, and the outline of a future visitor centre for the Winding Waltz. This plan shows the underground features there, and the underground shape of the Winding Waltz is superimposed on the railway line that's there. There are exits at all of the four corners, or will be, including an escape tunnel to 44 Gloucester Avenue. So this could actually become a pretty interesting complex around here, and not everything that could potentially exist is shown on this plan. One of the things that is shown is the safeguarded area, the 20 meter by 10 meter area that I mentioned, where we've built a ticket office. We've shown that there is seating, there is refreshments there that can be had, and it could also be a kind of assembly area. And you can see Winding Waltz Way running from the New Morrison's development pretty much straight to the visitor centre. Now, neither St. David's Halt nor the visitor centre are included in the scope of the feasibility study. On the other hand, we will have to provide for the safeguarded area, which is already existing in a sense, even if it hasn't yet been laid out. You may be aware of some of the underground features here. This is the Western Horse Tunnel here. There are some horse stairs which used to lead to some stables in what's now 42 Gloucester Avenue. And of course, Michael Nadra's restaurant incorporates part of the Western Horse Tunnel in the restaurant itself. So this is an artist's impression of what St. David's Halt and the visitor centre might look like, and the approaches to them. It shows a water bus stop, and it shows the outside seating, looking out over an animated Regent's Canal with all the kids in their canoes, and obviously the traffic on the canal. The one thing the artist isn't responsible for is the safeguarded area, which I've had to redraw after a mix-up between feet and meters. So it's now 10 times the area it was that when I gave it to the artist. And of course, the hydraulic accumulator tower, which is part of the which incorporates the lift of 42 Gloucester Avenue, is a sort of significant feature there. So this is one way that the walk might be arranged. How it will be arranged will depend on what space we're able to command from the development, and that's still something to be resolved. What you can see on the left-hand side there is a network rail security fence, a typical one with barbs on the top, and we've tried to disguise that with some planting and with the railings. There may be spaces that we can incorporate in that, so that people could, if they're interested, could view the trains that are running on the main line. That could interest quite a few people. So that would be one possibility on the railway side. And here we've tried to make a feature along Stephenson Walk of the original railings. You can see the original railings at the north end of Parkway Bridge, but here they've been incorporated into a sort of a standard 5-meter long pillar and rail type construction. So this is looking back towards the canal from just north of the Winding Waltz Visitor Centre. You can see that the artist has tried to capture the original chimney that was there in a new form. It may be somewhat exaggerated here, but you can see that the visitor centre would be opposite the safeguarded area, which you can see on the left here, and Winding Waltz Way. And here Stephenson's Walk is rather nicely depicted, with the greenery separating the railings and security fencing, and seating and some vegetation to green the area. Now, we're going to walk on. There aren't that many features really, but we're walking on past the road that serves Morrison, which Morrison's called Stephenson Street. I've called it Middle Cross on historic grounds, although I'm told the post office will object to that name. I think they'd like to have street or way or crescent or something, I don't know, in the title. So we pass Juniper Crescent, which is a lovely name, possibly connected to Gilby's Gin. As we pass that, we continue on past the Roundhouse, and here we must regret that there's no possibility of a side branch to the Roundhouse. The Roundhouse having been cut off by the North London Railway line since the 1850s. So here we've arrived at the throat, at the western end of the walk. The walk would be on the railway side, but here it has to cross the throat to the other side. And it has to cross it in such a way that railway maintenance vehicles can pass underneath. It's got to gain sufficient height for them to be able to pass under safely. So that's going to be a key element of the study, is how to ramp up to Primrose Hill Station and to the bridge. And we want to make sure that any works that are proposed will not compromise any future reopening of the station. This is a photograph of where the walk would end or begin. It looks as if it's ideally made for an opening. It's about 2.4 meters wide, and it looks like it's masonry that would quite easily be removed as the start of a ramp down to the area below. Now, that's kind of ended the walk, but there are many ideas that are associated with the walk, which I'm now going to describe to you. I've shown these as part of a sort of blue sky thinking, which because clearly these ideas haven't reached even a concept design level that Stephenson's walk has. I've already mentioned St. David's Halt, so we know a little bit about that. And I will now introduce you to some slides of the Winding Waltz. These, of course, the Winding Waltz themselves, of course, merit almost a separate talk, but I'm only going to show you some ideas and the reason why Stephenson's walk and the Winding Waltz are so closely kind of connected. There are two of these rope tensioning vaults. Oops. There are two of these rope tensioning vaults, and you can see here the line of that's normally where the vaults were normally submerged, where the difference between the white and the brick comes into play. So there are two of these, and there are two coal vaults. The one on the left is the eastern coal vault. So at the end of that vault is that gate that we saw earlier. You'd have to come down with a ladder at present. And on the right, we see the central vault, which is actually spectacular as an example of the art of the Victorian bricklayer. And this is the major transverse vault. We've been looking at longitudinal vaults. They run off here, off this vault to the left, but this is the engine room, which is a much wider vault, transverse, boiler rooms at either end. Still here shown full of rubble. We don't actually know how much of the rubble has been cleared, but because after they spent £1 million, they kind of ran out of money, and there was still more work to be done. I'm not sure how much of that has been done. Now this is a plan of the Winding Waltz, which shows some ideas for kind of repurposing the vaults. I don't really want to go into this in any kind of detail at all, but I want to point out that there is an entrance here as part of the visitor center, which has got 3 levels: the entrance, then a sort of mezzanine, and the basement area. This is the engine room that we saw. These are the coal vaults where I've written lower heritage gallery, and the idea is that we would have a working model of how the vaults operated to draw trains up from Euston, a scale model, 1:20 scale model. Now, this could accommodate quite a lot of people, both in the daytime and, of course, in the evening, when possibly more noise could be made, given the fact that they're so far underground and therefore kind of will not affect the neighbours quite so badly as other venues. So that means that safety becomes an issue. And as I said, we have safeguarded areas, exits at all four corners. So there's an exit here to Gloucester Avenue, and here there are stairs which lead to a gallery and out through the coal tunnel that we saw. And of course, there's stairs here at the entrance. So who's responsible for all of this? Well, this man here, Robert Stephenson, he was the one who built the Winding Waltz and the main railway, which is still being used. The question I ask is, does this statue belong in the proposed HS2 Euston station? Given that all vestige of his works there have been destroyed. And what better statue than this one to be moved to Stephenson's Walk from Stephenson Walk from Euston. But of course, we're probably getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here. And this, I'm sure, is a cheeky suggestion too far. Now, Stephenson's Walk could also have an extension, though this is a bit more of a challenge. The reason it's more of a challenge is that one reason is that HS2 are building their Adelaide Road vent shaft right here on the corner of on Avenue Road, just near the nature reserve here. They're not really at the moment being very amenable about creating a path in front of the vent shaft that would allow the extension to be formed. But we live in hope. And the idea here is that we would extend Stephenson's Walk along the railway here as far as the Primrose Hill Tunnel portals. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. Here we can see how popular this walk was with our Victorian forebears. This is an absolutely lovely watercolor engraving. You can see on the right-hand side here the chimneys of the Winding Waltz, and you can see the first bridge over the railway, Regent's Park Road bridge over the railway there. So one of the sights that they came to see were trains emerging from Primrose Hill Tunnel here. They were encouraged to go close to the railway, and you can see how close the walls are separating the railway lines from the public. They were encouraged to do that because the railway was at that time seen as a modern and attractive proposition, as was the whole area here, which Eton College wanted to develop for residential development in a healthy sort of out of town area for families. And here we see an image of the existing tunnel portal, the old 1837 one. There is another one dating from the 1870s on the other side. This is now one of 4 Grade 2 star listed structures of railway heritage in our close neighborhood. I asked the question, should Primrose Hill's finest monument and the story it tells be hidden from the public? I think as a community, we would benefit greatly from a better understanding of our social and industrial history, and from more connections to the past, that a better appreciation of these monuments could give us. And that includes the Winding Waltz and Primrose Hill tunnels and others. So for a long time, we have been seeking to develop a landscape plan around the tunnel portals. And at the moment, there is what was not an electricity substation, but a cooling station here and on this site. Cooling station to cool electricity cables that ran from Tottenham to St. John's Wood. New tunnels have been built for those cables, and this site, this structure here, this cooling station, is scheduled to be decommissioned and demolished this year. And obviously that's going to create a site that's very attractive for housing development. So we've been thinking of trying to get a landscape plan together that would enable a viewing platform to be created alongside certain housing development, including demolishing the existing shops and maisonettes here, which are the lease of which is declining rapidly, and the value of is therefore declining rapidly. They're on fairly short leases now. So if one could perhaps persuade the occupants of these flats, buildings, to move over here, we would be able to create a green space around here with a path, security fencing for Network Rail, and access to a viewing platform for the tunnel portals. We'll see that a bit more clearly on this slide here. You can see the outline of the National Grid cooling station that is due to be demolished, and an outline of some of the buildings that could take its place, with access to the rear, a bin area, and a small area here that provides public access to a viewing platform. I think that this would provide benefit not just to Network Rail, but also to Camden and the community. And it represents an opportunity for Camden to do some place shaping of this area before it's too late. We do know that the Berkeley Group, which is developing Morrison's as under their sort of St. George arm, they have another arm that is helping National Grid to make the most of its redundant properties. So that sends a few warning signals out, and we think it's time for some place shaping here that indicate what the community might want. So this is where so many of those living in Primrose Hill once worked. Camden Motive Power Depot. It was reached by a footbridge from Dumpton Place, and that footbridge passed the office window of the shed master, who could see all the comings and goings. Camden Shed, as it was known, housed more Pacific Express steam locomotives than any other locomotive shed. It was therefore a mecca for train spotters. You'll have to bear with me a little longer for the relevance of this. Here we see a Pacific locomotive, Princess Elizabeth, on the turntable at Camden Shed. The first Pacifica locomotive in the Princess class was the Princess Royal, but the locomotives were all known to railwaymen as Lizzies after Princess Elizabeth, the second of the class, which was famous for an epic non-stop run from London to Glasgow in 1936. 75 years on Battersea Railway Bridge, you may remember Princess Elizabeth sounded her whistle to start the Thames Dam and Jubilee pageant. The locomotive is now based at Crewe Heritage Centre. You can see from this painting, which is another one by and a lovely artist called Peter Green, you can see how that captures the pollution that was suffered by the local community before the Clean Air Act. And it might also be worth mentioning that coincidentally today is, of course, the Queen's 95th birthday. This is what the train wash sidings now look like. This is taken from Pembroke Castle, but you can see that there is a significant area here, about 1.5 hectares of land. I would suggest that the value of this land here would eventually encourage a search for an alternative site for train washing and an opportunity for residential development that I've called Pacific Village. Here is a sort of schema of Pacific Village. It adds further north-south and east-west links to those created between Camden and Primrose Hill by Stephenson Walk. But the only impact on the study itself, the feasibility study, will be to safeguard a landing site on or close to Stephenson Walk for a future footbridge across the railway. I think development here could accommodate perhaps 500 residents in 200 units. It would obviously benefit local shops, cafes, pubs, etc., and contribute to the concept of the 20-minute village. You can see that the main road in is shown as coming from Dumpton Place with a spine road that runs from east to west. I think the name of that spine road we should avoid anything like Sunny Mews or any names associated with Lord Southampton's many estates. This could well be called something more mundane like Ashpits Lane. At either end, I've shown roundabouts which are sort of mimicking the turntables that existed in approximately those areas as part of a sort of green space. And from those roundabouts, there are paths up to Regent's Park Road Bridge here and out to 42 Gloucester Avenue here, where there's a big entrance which is exclusively for railway use at the moment, but could easily become an entrance to a Pacific Village here. I've also shown a Winding Waltz service building, which would have the logic of enabling us to service the Winding Waltz with food, with whatever, from the Primrose Hill side, rather than have to go through the visitor centre. So I think Pacific Village would help Primrose Hill reconnect to its industrial past and to our working class forebears who lived in our houses, sent their children to the local schools and drank in the same pubs. This is part of the sort of a connection with what used to exist here and trying to find some associations. One association might be a model of the Princess Elizabeth in one of these areas, which I think would be something school children would find extremely fascinating. I've mentioned Camden's weaknesses when it comes to place shaping. Here's another opportunity to work with the community ahead of any development proposals. Finally, I hope we can associate Pacific Village. I think I'll go back to the previous slide. I hope we can associate Pacific Village with a legendary lady, a member of an aristocratic family who gave up her inheritance to marry a driver of long-distance express steam trains, one of the aristocracy of the working class. She spent the many years of her widowhood enlivening the social life of pubs in Primrose Hill. Now, this story may be apocryphal, but with some embellishment, it's a fine legend for future generations. There's been ample opportunity to ascend up to the blue yonder during the strange times of the past year. We must now come back down to earth for Stephenson's walk, which will prove enough of a challenge in itself. We will be inviting the views of the wider community. But of course, the discussion has already started here in its first public airing. The Morrison's redevelopment in its scale and intensity has an alien feel about it. Stephenson Walk will help integrate this intruder into the community. A side effect is that the walk would add obvious value to the Morrison's, One Housing and Lab Tech developments that we saw earlier. The community should extract some of this value to help fund the walk, quite outside any formal Section 106 type payments. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Peter. That was really fascinating and inspiring. We're nearly at time, but I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. Eleanor said, are you in touch with Argent and their King's Cross development? I'm assuming yes, since you...
Well, I was in touch. I was certainly in touch with them when I wrote that book, and they were very helpful. They gave me a lot. And I mean, they offered me money for the book, but instead I took basically some pictures that they gave me without costless. And they also allowed me to put my books into their sort of visitor center, and they sold them there for me. So I did very well out of Argent, but I'm no longer in touch with the people that were there developing Argent. I mean, I think that they've moved on now. So I'm not quite sure. Yeah.
So Jeremy asks, have you discussed the right-of-way issue with One Housing?
I have mentioned it to One Housing, and they sort of looked interested. I think that they hadn't seen. I don't know where it's got to be honest. I mean, I've got a piece of paper that says that this is what the condition is, but it seems like over time that the use of the area has changed. Mm-hmm. So there's kind of I suppose there's a slight conflict between use over time and what it says about the right of way. I'm not quite sure how that will play out.
Mm. So a good question from Leon, who says, how can we support the plan?
Well, please email us and let's discuss it.
So have you got a Camden Railway Heritage Trust email?
I do have a Camden Railway Heritage Trust.
Do you want to put it, can you put it in the chat for us?
I probably could, yeah.
That would be good. And Carol says, really interesting and hopeful. Would it not be possible to keep the beautiful shape of the coal tunnel? Presumably you would be looking at keeping some of the shapes of the...
I feel quite ambivalent about the coal tunnel, of course, because yeah, we can't create an important access to the Winding Waltz from the towpath without kind of opening it up a little bit. But we want to see whether we, and of course, the major part of the coal tunnel will still be there, but not the part that opens onto the towpath, which,
Right.
And that isn't original anyway. When the Winding Waltz were being served by coal, there was no retaining wall there. It was a sloping bank that went all the way back. And you can see in the coal tunnel how they've changed it when they built the retaining wall. So it's not quite original anyway, but I do appreciate that there is an issue over demolishing anything like that.
And Catherine says, what is the connection, if any, with the Camden High Line?
Well, that's a good question, yes. The Camden High Line sort of ends at Camden Gardens, doesn't it? And just on one side of Kentish Town Road. And I think we've all got to put our heads together to see how on earth we can get from there through a very complicated Camden market, Hawley Wharf market. The towpath is very busy. And then you've got to get across Chalk Farm Road. So the whole thing is quite complex. There's quite a join to be made up there. So yes, I think maybe the Regent's Canal towpath is the most obvious solution, but that's getting very busy.
Yeah. Amanda says, could we consider connecting our past with the future? For example, with a STEM center, that's science, technology, something, in the Winding Waltz to help young people, the young people you engage, to feel inspired about futures as engineers, as you are.
What a clever idea. I mean, we have some students at the moment that are sort of repurposing the vaults as part of their student exercise. And we'd love to see more ideas of that sort. So yes, I mean, this is all completely open at the moment. And in a way, we thought the Roundhouse might take an interest in this, but then they've probably got their hands full already. But given the sort of things that they're doing, that would be really a good way to develop the Winding Waltz, as long as we can find some sort of sustainable financial model.
Interesting. Yes, I must say it was a pity to hear that there really isn't a way of connecting with the Roundhouse directly on this walk. So there's the railway that goes between that side that couldn't be crossed.
No.
Yeah.
No. Well, I say not. I wouldn't say couldn't, but you'd have to either build a walkway over the railway, over the electrical railway, or somehow you'd have to tunnel, and neither of those solutions is very cheap.
Very good. Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about millions.
Gosh.
Whereas I think Stephenson's walk ought to be realizable for quite a modest sum.
Because of the kind of work that's going on anyway in that area.
Well, that's more the way it could be financed. If we could extract some money from some of the developers, that would be good, of course. But I don't think it'll be very costly. Yeah.
Great. Nadina, any other comments from you?
Actually, no. I mean, we are fully supportive of the walk, and we had been starting conversations to connect through the goods yard development from the back of the market, what the catacombs are. There's a huge difference in levels, but once the development advances, I think that we are open to talk to, to connect further, towards the Stephenson walk from the market. Yeah, ideally, we would like very much to do so.
Great. Great. And Eleanor asks if you've got a sort of ballpark costing.
A ballpark cost of the
of Stephenson Walk. What?
I would say at the moment we're looking at something of 3 to 4 million.
Right. So not.
But I don't know. I mean, I think this is what the feasibility study is going to tell us.
Yeah. Great. Well, maybe you'll come back and talk when you've got the feasibility study. That would be really interesting.
Yes.
Give us an update.
That would be maybe by the autumn. I think maybe we'll have that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're over time. Many thanks. Thanks to everybody for coming, and thanks particularly to you, Peter. We've had lots of enthusiastic comments in the chat, and good that you put your email there so that people can get in touch. And thanks also to Nadina. It's very nice to meet you, and very good to hear that the Camden Markets has got somebody like you working for it.
Indeed, I second that.
So I say good night and thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much, Dora.